Nahum chapter 2, and tonight we begin with verse 6 in our continuing study. The gates of the rivers shall be opened, and the palace shall be dissolved. Now remember, what we're seeing is the destruction and what's going to happen to the city of Nineveh. And when we talk about the city of Nineveh, remember we're talking about the capital of the Assyrian nation. So what happens to the capital happens to the nation as a whole. And the first thing that we notice in verse 6 is that the gates of the rivers shall be opened. That word opened,
Where are you again?
Nahum chapter 2 and verse 6, shall be opened. This word comes from a Hebrew word, pathak, and that word means to open wide. It's not just a matter of opening a river. You know, you can, as you travel along the coast, you can see sometimes small rivers that are open and flowing out into the ocean. But then again, you get close to one that is really wide open, and wide mouth, so to speak, as it's referred to. But also, Brown Driver and Brown tell us that this word also means to loose, to be thrown open, to carve. So Waldron quoted the historian Diatros Siculus from the 1st century BC, and he said that the siege lasted a long time, and they pressed their assaults for 2 whole years. Now he's talking about the Babylonians as they were allied with the Medes, and they were in a siege of Babylon or Nineveh for 2 whole years. So listen to what he says. The siege lasted a long time, and they were pressed their assaults for 2 whole years. But in the 3rd year, great storms of rain fell without cease, with the result that the Euphrates, it should be the Tigris, he miswrote that, became swollen, inundated part of the city, and overturned the wall for 20 stades. That's about 2 miles. And so he records for us, this historian from the 1st century, that apparently this information had been passed down, that they couldn't destroy the walls, as we noticed before. God's going to have to destroy them, and this appears to be God's method of destroying these walls. It caused a great rain. The walls were made basically out of mud bricks. They weren't great granite slabs of stone. And so the wall of the city collapsed. And this fits also with some of the knowledge we have from the Babylonians, that they were able to go in through the walls because this river flooded so badly that it washed out a part of these walls. Notice also then something else that fits what the historian told us. He said, "And the palace shall be dissolved." The word palace is kind of a mystery. It comes from a Hebrew word that is hakal, and hakal refers to a large public building such as a palace or a temple. But it's very unsure exactly the meaning of this word. It has not survived down through the ages so that we can absolutely know. It refers to a place that could have a lot of people gathered. And so it could be a temple complex where the people would come and gather all around the temple in large numbers, or gather at the palace for information or whatever. We have a real hard time understanding exactly what this place was. whether it was a temple, a palace, or even some big area where people gathered to celebrate different occasions, different holidays, etc. So the kind of building or place that it represents is unknown to us today. But the word dissolved comes from the word muk, and muk means to melt. That's an interesting word. Our English translations have translated it as dissolved. Well, that's kind of the same thing in a sense, but to melt, to melt, to cause something to soften and dissolve and thus dissipate. That's the idea of this word. The palace was caused to, as if it melted. Well, again, remember that the buildings of that time in this particular place were basically made of sun-dried bricks and sometimes kiln-dried bricks. But you would have to have a tremendous amount of material, wood, to have the fires to kiln dry enough bricks to build a city like Nineveh, the size of it. Remember, archaeologists now know from LiDAR transmissions that they've done over the ground that this city could have held 600 to 800,000 people. It was a huge city, especially for that time. In order to build all the buildings, it would have been an impossibility for them. They just didn't have the wood supplies in that time around that area. This was still, it was an area that was an area that could grow crops and things, but even then there had to be a lot of irrigation going on in that time in that place. So you can just see the palace made out of sun-dried bricks, if that be the case, and you can just see it melting away, so to speak, as more and more water rushed against it and in a sense melted all of those bricks, as mentioned by the historian Diodorus. It could also refer to a city being a great place of gathering for a lot of people. Now, this picture of this mighty destruction of a nation, of a city, of a capital, of Assyria is very important. Why? Because again, God has let it be known in the book of Jonah, for instance, and also in Daniel, and also in the book of Romans, that He's the one who sets up kingdoms. He's the one who puts rulers in their place. Man doesn't do this. God puts who He wants to be as the rulers of nations and establishes nations. So verse 7 then says, "And Huzzab shall be led away captive. She shall be brought up, and her maids shall lead her as the voice of doves, tapering upon their breast." The best translation of this verse seems to be the American Standard Version. Listen to it as we read it. "And it is decreed, she is uncovered. She is carried away, and her handmaids moan as with the voice of doves beating upon their breast. Let's read that again. "And it is decreed, she is uncovered. She is carried away with her handmaids moan as with the voice of doves beating upon their breast." Young's literal translation records, "It is established." That's the opening words of this verse in Young's literal translation. And again, that's an accurate thought here. In our King James it says, "And Hubbub shall be led away captive." It is established. What? Huzzub. This is an interesting word because it seems to imply Nineveh, not a name of a particular person. Nineveh is the Huzzab that's going to be led away into captivity, thus signifying their people. So God is decreeing that He has established that no matter how large her armies are, no matter what kind of weapons, they could have the best weapons in the world, or how great her defenses were, Nineveh is going to fall. Nineveh is going to be destroyed. Now, we need to consider that, because we have a nation today and nations all around us that have basically been established by human beings. But God is the one who actually established those nations. And if God could set them up, He can bring them down at any time He chooses. This in Nahum is an absolute declaration. It is an absolute. In Jonah, it was not an absolute that Nineveh was going to fall. They were going to be destroyed, but then notice something that happened. They repented. They had a change of mind. They decided that they had been extremely evil, and they repented, and they put on sackcloth and ashes. Notice their repentance caused an action. The action was not the repentance. Repentance was, as the original words show, a change of mind. And when they changed their mind, then they stopped murdering people. They stopped being ugly to people. They stopped being mean to people. They put on sackcloth and ashes. There is literally nothing that Nineveh can do to prevent this destruction. Not a thing, not this time. They've reverted back to the way they used to be. This is over 100 years later from the time of Jonah. And she's going to be carried away. Some have thought maybe the she here is the queen of whoever the king was at that time. Others believe that she is Nineveh, and of course I'm one of those. I think the overall picture here is the destruction of a nation, and that's why I look at she as being Nineveh. All of her people are going to be led away. They're either going to be led away captive, or they're going to be killed in the onslaught of God's vengeance. Remember, this is God's vengeance that is being brought upon Assyria for their failure to follow His law. Well, wait a minute. Isn't Nineveh, or wasn't Nineveh a Gentile nation? You mean to tell me, Bob, that God rules over nations that don't claim to be Christian? Yep. Don't claim to be His people? Yep. That's the picture. God rules over all the nations. And all nations are expected by Him to follow His rules, His laws. Doesn't matter who they are. That also shows us that God expects every human being on the face of the earth, whether they want to acknowledge that they are followers of His or not, they are still under His laws, His rules, even if they don't believe it, even if they say they don't. They still are under His laws and will be judged someday, just as Nineveh was for their disobedience. But notice something, no other people, as you go through this chapter a little further, we're going to see that no other people are going to mourn Assyria's downfall. Obviously, the Babylonians and Medes won't mourn their downfall because they're the armies that God has led to destroy Nineveh, to destroy the Assyrian nation. Her handmaids, notice, moan as with the voice of doves. They beat on their breasts. It shows the intensity of the mourning. Sometimes all people act differently in times of mourning. Some people don't seem to show the tears or the act of mourning like others do. Some will wail. I remember an occasion years ago when I was visiting a preacher friend of mine, and while we were talking, the telephone rang, and it was the grocery store, and the man of this family had a heart attack and died immediately in the aisle of the grocery store. None of his family was with him. And so the family, he had the responsibility that the grocery store people notified him that he was dead. And so he had the responsibility of calling the family and asking them to come to the building where we were so that he could inform them of what had happened. By the way, the police were involved in that request as well. And so they came to the building, and I'll never forget, he asked me to stand by the door of his office. He had a rather large office. And when the family all came in, they were wondering what's going on, and they knew some bad news was coming. They sensed it. And when he told them, one of the daughters of the man, I think she was about 16, if I remember correctly, she turned around and tried to run out the office screaming. And then I knew why he asked me to stand by the door, so that I could grab her and try to comfort her and keep her from doing something that might cause great harm to her. Everybody shows mourning and loss of loved ones and loss of life in a lot of different ways. They were showing it by mourning like doves and beating on their breast. Now we're going to look at verses 8 through 13, and this is going to show us after while Nineveh is being destroyed, the treasures of Nineveh are being sacked. That is, the army of Babylon and the Medes are taking everything that is of value. The destruction is thus complete of this city and this nation. So verse 8 reads, "But Nineveh is of old like a pool of water." Notice the description. "Yet they shall flee away. Stand, stand, shall they cry, but none shall look back." What comes from a pool of water in a hot climate? Cooling, regenerating refreshment, doesn't it? In the past, Nineveh had been like a pool of water in a very hot and dry climate, which they were. So they had been like a city of cool, refreshing water to those who came to her gates. This is what Nineveh had been to people. But what happens when a large pond or a large body of water that's held in by land, basically, what happens when that is breached? That is, when it's broken open somewhat. The water flees away. It leaves a dry and empty space. I remember as a boy growing up, and there was a pond out behind my grandmother's place, And I would go fishing there sometimes, and on one of the banks of this thing, blackberries grew, and at a certain time, man, I was glad those blackberries grew, and I'd go pick them and take them back to Granny, and she'd make a nice blackberry cobbler. Doesn't that sound good? And then we'd get out the makings, and we'd make our homemade ice cream, and homemade ice cream and blackberry cobbler, and fish to eat. But years later, I went back, and somebody had taken a plow and had cut the bank of that pond. It was a pretty good sized pond. And all the water had drained out of it. And now it was just a dry bed, no water, no fish, no blackberries growing nearby. The waters will flee away, leave a dry place. And this seems to be the picture that God is trying to get us to understand of Nineveh. Its people are going to flee away. Its people are going to be dying because there's no longer any sustenance there. It's no longer a city of refreshment, a place where people could go and maybe relax and have safety. When a dam breaks, nothing can stop the people from fleeing, just like nothing can stop the water from fleeing away. Water is going to seek its own level. When these protective walls of Nineveh were breached and broken down, nothing can stop the people from fleeing the enemy that is attacking them. But notice the words, stand, stand, shall they cry, but none shall look back. It appears as if someone is trying to stop the mass hysteria of the fleeing people by encouraging them to stand fast. In times of war, that is sometimes played out by two armies facing each other, and they're fighting, and all of a sudden you begin to realize that one of those armies is winning. And the army that's losing starts to lose their strength, their fortitude to stand up against this encroaching army. And they start to flee. And pretty soon, that's contagious, and the rest of the people in their army start joining them, and they're fleeing away. They're running for their lives. People are going to be routed like an army that is fleeing away, and nobody can stop them. During the American Civil War, there was a general in the Southern Army named Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall was not his actual name, it was a name that was given to him as a nickname. It was given to him because in one of the battles his men started fleeing. They started believing that they were beaten by the army they were facing. And all of a sudden they saw this man Jackson, General Jackson, standing, and he refused to back up. He didn't flee with his army. He urged them to turn around and fight. And they did. And they won that battle against a far superior fighting force of men. Their numbers were far greater, but they won the battle. Why? Because he had the fortitude and he was able to turn them back and convince them somehow by his remaining still and strong and refusing to turn around and run that they could win, and they did. And so they nicknamed him Stonewall Jackson. There stands Jackson like a stone wall. That was their cry. But most of the time, once an army turns and starts to run, it's a mad dash to escape destruction. That's the picture that's being drawn for us. They're fleeing and nobody can get them to stop. Nobody can get them to turn around and fight for their city. Look at verse 9. Take ye the spoil of silver, take the spoil of gold, for there is none end of the store, and glory out of all the pleasant furniture. The Assyrians had stripped their neighbors of their wealth in time past. They were known for killing all the people of a city who stood against them, taking every ounce of everything that was valuable, gold, silver, precious stones, whatever was of value, they stole it, they took it. And now, all of that treasure that they had taken from others, all of that treasure that they had stored up is going to be taken from them. Everything that's desirable, that's the picture being drawn for us. Everything that's desirable is going to be taken, and what is not desirable is going to be destroyed. That's how an enemy can so humiliate, so destroy the will of a people to fight against them. Take everything they have that's valuable, including their life, put them into slavery, destroy everything else, burn the city down. Look at verse 10. She is empty and void and waste, and the heart melteth, and the knees smite together, and much pain is in all their loins, and the faces of them all gather blackness. Look at that picture. She's empty, she's void, she's waste. Nineveh indeed became an empty place, a place void of human beings. They didn't live there anymore after Babylon and the Medo-Persians and the Syrians destroyed her. In fact, she disappeared from history. It wasn't until approximately 1940 AD that they finally discovered her ruins. So thoroughly had she been destroyed. This was a kingdom back in the 800 BCs. In fact, over 2,500 years before she was discovered again, that she had actually existed. The word waste, Strong tells us, means to annihilate. Balak, to annihilate. When you hear that word in the Hebrew, it just sounds bad. Balak. Brown, Driver, and Brown said that it was to be laid waste, to be devastated. And that's exactly what God caused to happen to Nineveh. Nineveh is being treated to the way that they had treated other cities and other people who had tried to stand against their armies. Notice the phrase, the heart melteth. The feelings, the will, even the intellect destroyed. The inner man of the Assyrians, their heart, they could no longer stand. In athletic terms, we might say that team has lost all heart. That team, in essence, has lost the soul of the team, has been ripped out of them. I remember a few years ago, a very good football team in the professional division who was beating everybody really bad, or almost everybody. They faced a team that should not have beaten them, should not have been able to win the match. Terrible team. Lost almost all of its games that year. But somehow, this team beat the good team. And the beating was so bad. I mean, they didn't just win a little bit. They beat them by, I believe, if memory serves me right, about 30 points. It was a terrible loss. It was like the heart was ripped out of them. After that, they went against other teams that they had beaten before already in that season, and they just didn't seem to have the ability to enjoy the game, to do their job, and give them a good thrashing or defense. They just couldn't seem to compete anymore. They showed up for the next game. They showed up for the rest of the season, but their spirit had been broken. That's the concept that we see here. There was no more pride and confidence in them, in these Assyrians. Their will had been broken. Their spirit had been broken by such a devastating defeat. Notice the term, the knees smite together. This is a word that comes from peak. Some people pronounce it pick, but this word is defined as being tottering or staggering, to stumble. They had been bruised and abused and wounded in such a way that their strength was no longer there. The strength had been taken from their legs. The result, they totter, they stumble, and they fell. Notice also that the text says that much pain is in all their loins. The word pain signifies trembling and terror, writhing in anguish. And the word loins refers to the waist and hips. Their bodies were trembling in terror. They were writhing in pain. The anguish was tremendous. And notice it says, the faces of them all gather blackness. Their faces were strained with defeat. Their faces were filled with dread and fear. There's no sign of hope in their faces. You can look at them and see they don't have any hope. They don't have any expectation of winning this battle. They don't have any expectation of living any longer. Young's literal translation says, and the faces of all them have gathered paleness. You ever seen somebody that has been injured badly? They know that they're about to die, and how the paleness comes on their face. Or someone who's extremely frightened, and how the coloring in their face will change. Or someone who is mourning greatly. The American Standard Version reads, the faces of them all are waxed pale. The color has gone out, hope has gone out of them. Waldron made this statement about this. He said, the courage flees, fear paralyzes, and faces grow pale. Courage flees, fear paralyzes, and faces grow pale. That's exactly what happens to an army that's defeated, to a people that are defeated. Well, I wish they'd figure out some way to keep these things from timing out. Maybe if I got a better tablet, maybe that'd work. Look at verse 11. Where is the dwelling of the lions and the feeding place of the young lions, where the lion, even the old lion, walked, and the lions whelp, and none made them afraid? What's this imagery of a lion got to do with the people of Assyria? Oh, when we look at the art that we've now discovered underground where Nineveh used to be, we see that the lion was often used in Assyrian art and propaganda to represent their fierceness and their power. Walls that have been discovered in this place that we now know as Nineveh have been shown with artwork of lions with wings, showing their power. One of the chief gods of the Assyrians was one called Nergal. And Nergal was the war god. It was symbolized, or he was symbolized, this god, so-called god, was symbolized as a winged lion with a man's face. That was the emblem of this war god. The goddess Ishtar was often depicted as mounted on a lion's back, or as a lioness herself. This was a very important god to the Assyrians. It was a very important symbol to them. And so now God says, where is the dwelling of the lions? Well, let's think back. What happened to Nineveh? Oh, it disappeared from history, covered over by the sands of time, the refuge of time, until it totally disappeared from history for 2,500 years. They don't exist anymore. There's no sanctuary for Nineveh's people. A nation of people calling themselves Assyrians do not exist anymore, not literally. There's no place of safety for them to raise their young warriors, the people of Nineveh. There's no place for them to walk around in safety and thumb their noses at all the nations around them. There's no place to train their young warriors. They had ruled the world, and now it was they who would no longer exist. Look at verse 12. The lion did tear in pieces enough for his whelps, and strangled for his lionesses, and filled his holes with prey, and the dens with raven. Since Nineveh portrayed herself as a strong lion, used that imagery, Nineveh became the den, the place where the strong lions dwelt, where the citizens of the lions would live, would feel safe. Their walls couldn't be broken down by armies of that time. Only God could cause them to fall. And God did. God broke through their walls through a flood. The old lion and the lion's whelp obviously seems to represent the king and his nobles. And in the kingdom of lions, who is it that does the hunting? Primarily the hunting for the pride, for the group of lions, the pride, for the young lions, even for the king of the lions. Well, it's the lionesses. In the kingdom of lions, it's the lioness which primarily does the hunting. It's they who, and this seems to indicate the Assyrian army. And by the direction of the king, his armies had been sent out to provide all the people of the city of Nineveh with protection from enemies, to gather the sustenance that they needed. Haley said something that I think is quite interesting here. He said the word raven is from a word that meant to tear, hence that which had been torn from others, or booty. Been sent out. What? To gather from all the nations, to tear their wealth from them, bring it back to Nineveh, give it to the people, make them rich, make them secure by tearing away all of the security of these nations around them so that they themselves had security. The Assyrians had caused others to suffer greatly, and they bragged about it. Oh, look what we've done to other nations. Isn't that common among physical nations? Look what we've been able to do. Look how we've been able to conquer other nations. Look how we have provided wealth and safety and strength for our own people. Waldron made this statement. He said, there is no problem documenting the cruelty of the Assyrians, whether from the annals of Tiglath-Pileser, one of the kings of Assyria, early in the history of Assyria, or from the inscriptions of Ashurbanipal. Roper made this statement. He said, the fierceness and the brutality of the lion accurately portrays the practices of the Assyrian army, who were known for impaling and flaying their enemies. One of the kings, Sennacherib, even boasted of being raging like a lion. When you see just that little description that Roper has given, and it is accurately displayed on some of the walls and inscriptions that they have found for Nineveh, bragging about how they had treated everybody else so cruelly, bragging about their killing. And the idea of flaying, just to give you an idea of what they're talking about, to show you how cruel they were. This is talking about skinning a person alive, while they're alive, taking their skin off. What cruel people. Look at verse 13. Behold, I am against thee, saith the Lord of hosts, and I will burn her chariots in the smoke, and the sword shall devour thy young lions, and I will cut off thy prey from the earth, and the voice of thy messengers shall no more be heard. That's where we'll come back to next week.